it could be a serious rebuilding year, I think, without question. Next year, I think USC could be looking at a tough stretch and a tough record. And, I think it'll really determine if Clay Helton is up for the task, because if they win next year, if he finds a way to win 10 games, the expectation should be way different than this year. And if he finds a way to win 10 games, I think that will quiet a lot of people down.
So, Chris, that's certainly a point of note there, because I think while the roster may dictate and the schedule that it's going to be difficult to win a lot of games, the division sets up for USC, meaning that if you go to the other top programs in the country, Ohio State's got to deal with Penn State, Michigan State. Yeah. Alabama's got to deal with Auburn and LSU, and we could go through the rest of the lot. Maybe Georgia might be a different case because the SEC East is so weak right this second. And USC might be in the same boat. They might lose some games, but I don't know that anyone in that division, not that no one can challenge them, but considering the coaching turnover at Arizona State, and just the talent not being there, and of course UCLA, we'll see what they can do in a first year under Chip Kelly, that USC still, they could win 8 games and still make it to the Pac-12 championship game.
Yeah, that could happen. And you know what? Maybe if they do win 10 and they go through that division and it's weak again, because the whole conference was weak this year, and I think that played into the record, I could understand, that criticism. I could. I personally think that if you have a first-year quarterback and you're, and it's not somebody like Sam Darnold, and you figure out a way to win and you figure out a way to make that defense good, it's going to, could be losing guys at every level, honestly. They already are at safety. They could be at corner. They already are at linebacker, and they could be along the defensive line, losing guys that are huge impact guys for them. To me, it would be impressive if they won 10 games regardless, because they would have to have a good defense, and I'm not sure that they will next year. And they would have to figure out how to move the ball. And honestly, if they didn't have Sam Darnold and Ronald Jones this year, I'm not sure they could have moved the ball with that offensive line. So the offensive line would have to improve. And that's probably, to me, the biggest point of emphasis in this program right now, because that's what I watched Notre Dame have, a top 10 level offensive line. Ohio State had that too. USC didn't. That's what jumped out to me about those 2 games. And I think that if that improves, this team has a future. If it doesn't, they don't. So I think next year we'll be telling you, if they win 10 games, I'm ready to say, hey, that's an impressive job to me, because I really don't expect them to get close to 10 wins at all. I think that they'll reset at quarterback, and it will cost them big problems, even with a weak division. So we'll see. But in my opinion, Clay Helton does that. If he gets to 10 wins next year, it's time to quiet down a little bit. But right now, I totally understand the criticism, because it's very warranted.
So I'm taking a bit of a different angle, that the record might not be that good. They've got Texas and Notre Dame, and Texas on the road. They could lose those 2 games. They go 7-2 in the conference. They're 8-4, and they go to the Pac-12 championship game. They could go, it's possible, go 6-3 in the conference, still win the division, go 7-5, and go to the Pac-12 championship game. Is not that much of a stretch, considering what a jumbled mess the rest of the division should be.
Yeah, I get that too, because, Texas seems like they're improving. I know that they didn't have a great record this year, but they seem on the edge of being really good. And Notre Dame, it seems like they're kind of, every year they could be good. Sometimes they're really not, but they're always there too. USC's out of conference schedule makes it hard on them as well. That's something that I don't think a lot of people point out, because you see these other teams not scheduled that way. So we'll see. They will get tested regardless, even if the Pac-12 isn't tough. They were tested this year regardless, and it didn't turn out well for them. So
it's definitely something I mention from time to time, because you're right. Because I go through a scheduling analysis in July or August, and I rank all the schedules, and I typically have USC somewhere in the top 5 or 10. I think I had them with the #1 schedule in America, meaning the most difficult schedule in the country a couple of years ago, because of what you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Most teams get some type of accolade or credit for going out and scheduling one really hard non-conference opponent. Well, USC has that in play all the time with Notre Dame, and then I think they feel as though they need to have another game, just because if they always schedule just Notre Dame, in their conference schedule that people will be like, this is a boring schedule.
Yeah.
We know what it's going to be every year. So they got to go out and run out and grab a Texas or somebody else. And so they have, and there are more teams in the last couple of years, Chris, doing this, scheduling 2 difficult games, but USC has been doing this for a long time, and they're very much still in the minority of scheduling 2 very difficult Power Fives.
Yeah.
And then last year they had Western Michigan, who was coming off a 13-0 Cotton Bowl team. So they had no gimmies during the entire season.
Yeah, and I think too that what people don't realize is they're in Los Angeles, and USC has to sell tickets to fans that need a reason to show up to games. They will just watch on TV. It's not Green Bay, Wisconsin, or Alabama, or something like that. So you have them wanting to schedule Texas, like you mentioned, or other big name teams, and then even sometimes the team that's supposed to be a break doesn't come from the Mountain West Conference or something like that. Sometimes they'll come from the Power 5 conferences because USC feels that they need to sell tickets. And, are you going to show up to USC versus San Jose State? Maybe the diehard will. But, so a lot of times you see like a Syracuse or a Boston College or some team that maybe, isn't a big name team, but they're very confident and able to beat you if you don't play well. So, yeah, USC schedules is really hard. They really try to make it as difficult as possible. And then I think the 9 conference games is a little bit of an underrated factor. The Pac-12 is usually a tough conference, even if they don't have that top end team. They usually don't have really bad bottom, kind of teams like the cellar dwellers, I guess we'll call it, kind of teams. They usually don't have that. So every team is a tough out. So yeah, next year USC's schedule could be really hard. It actually, you're right, it could end up being that way. And that wouldn't surprise me at all. And I kind of expect it to be more difficult than this year. I expect the conference to get better next year because this year kind of seemed like, not really the norm for the Pac-12 at all.
All right. Love the discussion with Chris Swanson talking up USC football. You can catch him there on Trojan Sports. It's the Rivals Network for USC football. And of course, the recruiting coverage is unmatched across the board right there. Chris, we appreciate the discussion. Thanks for stopping by.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate it.